name is Heather, and I'm a trauma therapist, and I use technology in my therapy as a neurofeedback therapist to help my clients remember themselves. So when Jose was talking about using technology in a way that brings us back to ourselves and brings us back to our connection, I feel that that's what neurofeedback has the potential to do. In many ways, it has the potential to help us look inside and realize what's there. And once we recognize what's there, we don't need the technology anymore. It's just a mirror. But often when we have a mirror, it's easier to see what we're looking for when we see the reflection. And once you've seen your reflection, you have a sense of what you look like. And then you can move forward from there. So I got into meditation research because I was in a car accident when I was 21. I was completely crushed. And my first memory after seeing the car speeding towards my door was the jaws of life 3 inches from my face. I was completely wearing the car. I shattered my pelvis. I broke my jaw. And this was my first dissociative experience. My memories are extremely calm. And I remember looking out the window and seeing everybody look at me with horror on their face, and yet I didn't really understand what was happening. Those who were on the scene said that I was extremely combative, screaming, fighting, trying to get out of the car, yet I was not connected to this. Later, with medicine work, actually in an ayahuasca ceremony, I did release the body memory of my car accident. It took about 10 years for that to happen. And it was a very profound experience for me. And at that moment, I connected and recognized, wow, I can really compartmentalize myself. Part of myself can just be completely put away. So prior to that medicine ceremony, I'd actually started using meditation to help me get out of this dissociative state, because I felt like my brain had been rewired and I didn't know what was going on. So I went back to school to try to understand, how did meditation help me? So for my undergrad thesis, I studied different types of meditation, but I was introduced to the idea that instead of trying to understand traits of meditation, we wanted to understand the state of meditation. Meditation is a state, and the traits we have from meditation come from the way we alter that state. So we developed something called the mindfulness-based attention score, where we would run people through different meditation states, and they had a button, and every time we sounded a bell, were you paying attention or were you not? And so then we got a sense of, based on people's psychometrics and the different types of meditations, which meditations would be good for certain people and when, based on how they were attending. We published in the Journal of Psychological Assessment, so you can find that there if you're interested. Then for my master's research, I had been studying dissociation, studying meditation. I've been working as an assistant doing EEG. And for dissociation, we got really interested in the default mode network, because people with trauma actually have their default mode network is shut down. But what we recognized is actually, wait, when you look at the psychedelic research that was coming out, well, the default mode is also shut down. Well, how is it that a no state in dissociation is so similar to a no state in trauma? So we had just been working with alpha in and of itself, which is driven from the thalamus, and the thalamus is in the center of the head, and it's kind of the relay station or grand central station between the information from the body to the cortex and back. So it's kind of like this pulse of self, a meeting place between the body and the mind. Alpha signatures are low in dissociation, and research has shown that with psychedelics, we see this shrinking of the alpha rhythm. But we saw also that this larger bandwidth was included with psychedelics. So we started researching, well, what would happen if we used neurofeedback to mimic a psychedelic state that we found in psilocybin? So I'll just go quickly over some of my results. So this is, we compared our findings with my thesis with research done by Struders and Vollenweidner in gamma. And we see that the neurofeedback, which is the blue, and psilocybin, which is the orange, it's not unlike what we see with psilocybin. So there was an audio-visual synesthesia, lowered anxiety, a state of disembodiment, insightfulness, a blissful state, and experiences of unity reported on the OAV, or the Altered State Scale, which is a standard measure used in psychedelic research. What we really noticed, though, is that those who experienced disembodiment were positively correlated with the traits of emotionality and absorption. And we know that absorption is part of what we want to see in a psychedelic state, because that's tied to surrender. Disembodiment is that ability to let go. It's that feeling I'm out of my body. I'm kind of letting go of myself in many ways. We also saw that we kind of had this factor analysis that overlapped with microdosing. So we saw elevations in mood. So I would bring people into the lab and I would sit them in front of, so I have it here actually, oops. This is a participant. So they'd be watching videos on a screen, and every time their default mode network quieted, the screen would clear. But anytime they started thinking or mind wandering, a fog would come. So you had to learn to drive it by squishing your default mode network activation. So when I was first doing this, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just hooking people up and letting them watch fractals and be like, well, let's see what happens. And then I had them send me an email after about 24 hours and say, what did you notice? And so there was like these changes in time perception. They felt calm, they felt relaxed, altered sense of, I already said that time, vivid dreams and senses. Spontaneous processing was really cool. I had a couple people say that during it, they had all these memories from their past coming up, yet they felt really calm and kind of present, and they noticed that they were able to process. A couple people, because it was all students I was doing research on, got a lot of work done. They were like, oh man, I went home and I got all my stuff done. And this was my experience. Because I had access to this during my master's, I was doing it all the time. Because every time I did it, I was like, I feel really good. It's 15 minutes of neuro meditation. I was like, right. And I just write all this stuff, and girls in my program were like, how on earth are you getting so much done? I was like, I don't know. I just keep doing this neuro meditation. It seems to be working. So basically what I learned from this is that trait does not dictate state. And that was a bit of a paradigm shift for me, because as a psych student, I was like, oh, I got to know the traits. What's the traits these people have? But then, wait, there's all these different trait measures, and everyone's arguing over which trait measure is the best. And we know that when somebody's in a mindful state, we actually see openness, acceptance, and curiosity. These are the traits we're looking for. So actually, traits change with meditation. We see that traits change with psychedelics as well. So in my free time, I like to hook up friends. Here's Jose. This is Dr. Michael Winkleman. He came for a visit, and he studies shamanism and consciousness, and he's become a wonderful mentor. And I'm really grateful that he came to see me and got to play with him. And here's Jack. We're working on his third eye. I think we're going to continue working on his third eye throughout this conference. I think this has enabled his ability to wear less clothing. I think that's what I'm considering. So early neurofeedback actually was started by studying meditators. So this is Elmer Green. I highly recommend, this is like one of these foundational books if you can get a hold of this. He's got some videos on the internet and he's awesome. He's a really funny guy. So we got the idea that altering alpha, but also altering theta, is what we saw in meditators. So Alpha-Theta Neurofeedback is something that's still used very prominently in the neurofeedback community today, and it's used to help people with trauma predominantly. When I found out about this, I was like, oh yeah, Alpha-Theta, I'm gonna give it to everybody and try it. And my supervisor was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You have to be very careful. Because the thing with neurofeedback is you train someone and their brain learns something, but they keep learning. And it takes about 3 hours sometimes for it to really settle in. And people can have memories unlocked, like a psychedelic, but you may not be there as the clinician. And I have seen this happen with Alpha-Theta, but I've also seen this happen with 1 to 20. So I've since learned how to prepare someone for a deep state, get them into their body a little bit more. So if something from the unconscious is unlocked, they're not just thrown by it or lost with it. So again, the importance of states is that if we understand what state we're in. So some of my clients, after I've been working with them a bit, they're like, oh, I understand now that anxiety is a state. They're not, I am anxious. No, you have anxiety. It comes and it goes. You are not depressed. Depression is a state. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. They are things that happen to you. We want to learn to surf these things, as opposed to be cognitively fused with them to the point where we believe them. Because your body, your limbic system and your brainstem does not know the difference between what you think and what's actually happening. It doesn't know. And we all know this. Right before my talk, I started thinking a little too much. There goes my heart. I was like, oh God. So then I just started to pay attention instead, because I don't need to worry, because I'm not actually in my talk yet, and my heart rate was able to come down. So there's this concept of polyphasic that I got from this article. Perceptual diversity is polyphasic consciousness necessary for global survival. Lumpkin is an anthropologist. She has a couple other writings that I highly recommend. Michael Winkelmann talks about this in his research as well. So cultures that are polyphasic in their approach have ordered neural networks in such a way that they can more easily access a variety of perceptual processes. And it seems that I sent an early version of my slides are on here. So recent research compared psilocybin to meditation, or they put them together in a retreat setting using expert meditators. And in the conclusion, which I had up here before, it talks about how, it seems that when we put meditation and psychedelics together, that people seem to have this ability to alter their mental state afterwards at will. You become more state aware, so you have access to more states. You realize that, hey, I can shift gears. And that I can be not even in control, but in relationship with the different states and aspects of self that I can journey through. So I thought that was cool. So basically, I felt they were talking about a polyphasic state. So clinically, what I have seen the psychedelic-informed neurofeedback to do is to help people recognize themselves away from their thoughts. Because the feedback only works when you are observing, when you're being curious. And this is a subtle shift. This subtle shift can be really tricky. And I think a lot of us here understand it because we play with altering our states. And when I've come to when I've come to psychedelic conferences and I've done neurofeedback on the people who are here, I notice that you guys are able to tinker with your DMN a little quicker, but I predominantly work with clinical samples. And sometimes it's like mind-blowing. People start crying. They're like, what is this thing? Then they start getting into this flow where they feel. I see all their tension come down. I see them start to relax. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, let go. Be in the moment. Surrender to what's happening right now, right here. And recognize how busy your mind is. You don't have to stop it. Just when it comes in, you're like, oh, that's a thought. Oh, okay. Coming and going, coming and going. So in the research, we've talked about we need surrender and absorption to facilitate an altered state, particularly a mystical experience. The things that stop us are preoccupation and a low ability to surrender, which means you're in your head, you're thinking too much, you're cognitively fused, essentially. Again, Winkelmann and Lumpkin talk about this idea of polyphasic versus monophasic. So monophasic is the sympathetic dominant state. And from a trauma therapy standpoint, there's something called structural dissociation. It's a model. Jonna Fisher is the one who kind of presents it a lot in research. You can find her work online. And when we've had trauma, we tend to take our left hemisphere and our right hemisphere and we break them apart. And I feel in religion, I see this as, the good and the bad. And then we compartmentalize and shut ourselves off from the things we don't want to feel, which is actually our embodied state. Bessel van der Kolk talks about how the body keeps score. These memories can be stored in the body. And then so we busy ourselves by staying on task. I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to go, 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 and da-da-da-da. And then when we sit down, we're like, start to cry, or these feelings seep in, or what's going on? And so I got to get busy again. I don't want to do that. Or it's so much that we just shut down and we go into a low state, which is a different kind of dissociation. It's a different kind of avoidance. Polyphasic is to wrap yourself together, is to pull your left and your right together. Your shadow side is not your enemy. That's your brainstem. That's your limbic system. That's your body. That's your defense mechanisms, which are actually your sentinels. They are your guards. And so when we move into a polyphasic state, we recognize that involving the body by drumming, by dancing, by using divination and dreams, that we come more into relationship with our symbolic side of self, we are both symbolic and cognitive. I think in about 5-10 years, we might see this proliferation of institutes for training the brain, and we'll be like personal trainers. So when I explain it to clients, I'm like, okay, look, your fast frequency is like your arms. You build in your arms. Your middle or alpha, which is what I work with the psychedelic, is your core. You want to keep your core tight. Slow wave, theta, delta, limbic system, emotionality. Brainstem is like your legs. I see a lot of people walking around really top heavy. Everyone's like, I'm so strong in my cortex. But where are you in your core? Where are you in your ability to recognize this is a thought, this is a feeling, to move back and forth? Have you done any squats lately? What's going on there? So in the research literature that I read, they said, oh, well, maybe we can screen for these cognitive barriers, and then using neuroscientific literature, we can teach people who have this rejection of anything that's not scientific that this is actually scientific, and we'll use cognition to battle cognition. And I was like, no, that's not going to work. I mean, yes, it's part of it, but if we're coming from a polyphasic approach, we need the monophasic, which is all this literature. It's super important. But we also need to use state, because in traditional cultures, they use state. You would dance for days. You would put yourself into an altered state, a theta state. Theta states, trance states, a deeper state, deeper into the core. Embodiment is more active than cognition, because that's a state of surrender. And in order to surrender, then we're more likely to be able to have this mystical experience. So what if we were able to use neuromeditation as a way of starting to teach states? So instead of being so preoccupied and full of cognitive biases, we actually fuse the two, which is more on the polyphasic end, and we're able to enter into a state of scientific surrender, of informed surrender. Not just a complete letting go, but yes, you can have an informed surrender, which then allows you to have a complete integrative surrender. So these are the different neuromeditations we're working with. I actually met Jeff Tarrant right after I finished my thesis, and I found his work while I was writing my thesis, and I was like, oh my God, this guy, this is so cool. So now we've been working together ever since. And what I've come to see is that with my clients, by using these frameworks along with traditional neurofeedback, I can teach them to recognize these three core networks in our brain, right? We have the inside self, which is our default mode network. We have the central executive network, which is being on task and focused. And then we have the salience network, which is kind of our switching station. It's our insula, it's our embodied state of self, but there's also a state of attention too needed. These are the different meditations that have been affiliated with each of these. Most meditation practices go through a series of this for a reason, because this is the architecture of self. You need these neural networks to be strong so that you know where to put your attention and know where you're putting your attention and understand where your states are going. So this was the slide. This is the paper that I was talking about, psilocybin-assisted mindfulness training, modulate self-conscious and brain default network connectivity with lasting effects. These people become polyphasic. They have more access to different perceptual processes, to different states. So, can brain-computer interfaces enhance the likelihood of someone experiencing something mystical? Can we move in from a symptom management model into a preventative model? So I thank my partner for this. I came home one day after work all irate. I'm like, the medical system and mental health, and I was super frustrated. And he was like, well, isn't your field in its infancy? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, isn't all this neuroscience kind of new? I was like, yeah. He's like, well, it's like dentistry. I was like, what? What do you mean it's like dentistry? He said, well, before dentistry used to do any cleanings and got into that, it was mostly just symptom management, right? You got a cavity, we're going to fill it. You got a problem with your gums, we're just going to treat it. And you'll have this for life, and you'll need to come to the dentist all the time. And nobody believed that by doing preventative work, there would be any money in it. Well, what if like neuromeditation and various biofeedback and somatic work therapies actually became like going to the dentist? And it's like, we floss your default mode network, we floss your central executive, we get all the shit out of there, keep it clean so that you can be integrated. Then, once you know how to do that yourself, which is just meditation. But because we've gotten so far away from these practices, you know, we go on YouTube, we learn from someone, and then we just carry on. You know, you have to do this every day. You need to floss every day. Even though the dentist cleans your teeth, you still have to go home, you have to floss your teeth every day. So, but it could be nice for the dentist to show you just how to do it. And so if we could kind of validate, these are the states you want to practice at home, see how they're going, come back, we can make it a little more challenging over time. We could potentially have a way of using prevention instead of symptom management. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. This is my friend Andrew Judge. He is a professor of land-based practices. He's Anishinaabe and he's from Canada, and he's highly committed to Canada's objectives for truth and reconciliation. Recently we were talking and he wants to see if he can create VR experiences in where we understand each plant from seed all the way until its full flowering time, create virtual gardens, and then fuck with the weather and planting methods and see what would happen if we made the weather too hot. How would these plants grow? How are we going to prepare for climate change? Does anybody actually know what we're going to do? Could we use virtual reality to do that? So I started showing him meditation, neuro meditation, and he was finishing his PhD at the time, and we got really into this. And I am not Indigenous, but I really, really respect and have a reverence for where this knowledge comes from. So I'm going to defer to his interpretation of what his experience of neurofeedback has been, and kind of the interweaving of his culture stories and how he sees them overlap. All right, so I got...
Bonjour, me comecei indigenous, me chicken odam, just kan zibi and dunjaban, schnabe ninian dao, ujbige ninian dao. Hi, my name is Dr. Andrew Judge, and I'm here to talk about something really important to me and also to Heather. We've been working together for just about 2 years now, and we've been working on finding the intersection points between neurofeedback and Indigenous knowledge. What we're seeing is that neurofeedback is able to remind people of their humanity. I'm standing here in my garden, Minjamandan. It means a state of remembering. It's remembering what we are as human beings and our role on this earth at this time. In order to understand that, I want to introduce you to 5 words in my language that have changed my perception of the world. The first is Ode. Ode sometimes is translated to heart in English. What it actually means is the pump carrying the sacred waters throughout the body. Not only is it the starting point from where we are conceived and where we grow from, but it's also the first sound that we hear. It's our mother's heartbeat that we're hearing within the womb. The blood in our veins is like the water of the earth. And additionally, Ode, when I say Ode, I'm referring to something else in the language, Wasmowin. Wasmowin is a type of electricity. It's the type of electricity that branches through the sky. And when I say Ode, that's actually the concept that I'm referring to. The electricity and the beat, the rhythm. This is our starting point, Ode, Ode. And each time that our heart beats, those things are happening. The second word I want to introduce you is to Ishkode. In my culture, Ishkode is translated to fire. In my culture, all fire is sacred. And when I say that word, Ishkode, you can tell, Ishk is strength. Ode, of course, is referring to what I just told you. And so we know that the fire means the strength of this place. The third word I want to introduce you to is Ode Wagon. Ode Wagon is the drum. Now, a lot of people wonder why do the Anishinaabe use drums? Why do we sing these fantastic songs? Well, we're reminding ourselves of the place of our origin, that place right here, the original place where we came from in that sacred womb of our mothers. The fourth word I want to introduce you to is Odema. Now today we refer to Odema as village or town or city. In Anishinaabe cosmology, Odema is a reference to the place where the hearts gather. And it's a reminder for us that we can gather again from this place, not only to have more connection to one another, to recognize the likeness between one another, but also to remember where we are from. To remember that we are all connected on this earth and we have a responsibility not just to each other, not just to people, but to all the beings of creation. But when you understand those concepts, you begin to understand the final word. It's actually the height of consciousness in Anishinaabe cosmology, Odebwewin. Odebwewin is truth. Indigenous people across the world are reminding all of humanity of what the truth is, what it is that our responsibility is. And what we've seen is that neurofeedback can actually allow someone to experience their own humanity, to remind them of their place on the earth. Lastly, I just want to say that I experienced this. I've been very grateful to Heather, who's allowed me to experience neurofeedback on multiple occasions. Not only has my understanding of my culture developed over the time that we've been together, but through the neurofeedback, we've been able to see these incredible interconnections of awakening certain parts of the brain that can allow one to remember. Thank you.
When we see the heart beating in that way, and you can find this on YouTube, you get a sense of how your circulation, how the water's in your body, how your heart is the starting place. 50% of the alpha rhythm comes from the thalamus, and that is driven by the heartbeat. The speed of the information transfer is driven by the heartbeat. So when I'm working with clients, I have to help them move into a state of surrender by actually teaching them to control something called the baroreflex. Because the baroreflex is a sensor on your arteries that says how much activation and calm do I have in my system. But it just resets itself every day. It's not under conscious control. So if you've been going really, really, really fast, boop, 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 this becomes your set point. Then when I try to calm you down, my clients have something called relaxation-induced anxiety. Their heart goes, whoa, no, this is not the speed we go, and it goes boom, 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 boom. So I also have to teach them not to be cognitively fused with the body's attempt to protect them. You also have something in your brain called the amygdala, and the amygdala will kindle itself too. So there's these two different networks. Your brain can then start going, ah, even when you relax. So sometimes when we first start to relax, we actually get anxious. But that's an opportunity to create a relationship with anxiety. So just follow along with this. Inhaling, thank you, and exhaling. When we breathe in a rhythmic pattern, inhales activate the nervous system, exhales relax the nervous system. If you spend time breathing at 6 breaths per minute or less for 5 to 10 minutes, 1 to 3 times a day, you can reset your baroreflex. You can start resetting the rhythm of your heart. You can start reconnecting with the centered point of you. And when I do this with my clients, I find that then we're able to proceed with the neurofeedback and they can start entering into a state of surrender more easily. You have to call your body in to your surrender. You can't just surrender with your mind. It's a body-first process. Thank you for coming to my talk.